They called him Coach's problem, just a bitter old man clinging to medals no one cared about. That's what one of the assistant staff muttered in the hallway, loud enough for Tyrese to hear, right after they benched him again. The boy didn't speak, didn't protest, just walked home in silence and placed the jersey on the armrest where his grandfather, Walt Jensen, sat every Friday night without fail, oxygen tank quietly hissing beside his chair. No one saw the war inside that living room. The photographs with folded flags, the cane leaning against a leg still wrapped in decades-old shrapnel, or the shadow box on the wall, sealed shut since '72. No one saw it open that night for the first time in 50 years. Inside, 3 medals long since decommissioned, a handwritten note signed by a general, and the words, "To the man who taught us what silence under fire really means." If you still believe that dignity isn't measured by volume, but by the lives it touches in silence, then like and subscribe. Because what happened next on that high school football field didn't begin with a protest. It began with a boy, a bench, and a legacy too strong to ignore. The night before the game, Tyrese sat across from his grandfather as the TV flickered between static and Friday highlights. Coach Keller had called him out in front of the whole team that afternoon. "You're not here to play soldier, son. This isn't a parade. You want to honor something? Go join the marching band." The room had laughed, except for Darnell White, the team's star wide receiver, who just kept staring at the floor. Tyrese didn't tell his grandfather what was said. He didn't need to. Walt could always see it in his eyes. "They think you're weak," Walt said that night, "because you lead with quiet. Because you remind them of what they never had to carry." He tapped the glass of the shadow box once, then rose slowly and pulled it from the wall. Time they remember what still matters. That's when he opened it. The metals clinked against the velvet lining like thunder in a quiet room. The note fell into Tyrese's hand. The boy didn't cry, but something in him changed. He folded the letter, placed it in his cleats, and nodded. The next day, the stands were packed. Lincoln High's bleachers buzzed with pre-game hype, phones out, parents loud, the band warming up on the edge of the field. Coach Keller barked orders, pacing like a drill sergeant without a mission. Tyrese was suited up, but standing near the Gatorade cooler, helmet tucked under one arm, ignored. Darnell jogged over once, slapped his shoulder pads, whispered, "Today's different," and ran back to the huddle. Walt was already there, second row, dressed in his old field jacket with his unit's patch faded but intact, his oxygen mask draped around his neck like a forgotten war trophy. Nobody noticed him, until they did. Because just as the national anthem began and the crowd rose, Tyrese stayed kneeling. And behind him, like dominoes tipped with purpose, Darnell went down next. Then the left tackle. Then the cornerbacks. One by one, the entire team took a knee, not in defiance, not in rebellion, but in quiet alignment with the man in row 2 who had once written a doctrine of sacrifice no one had cared to read. Coach Keller shouted, furious, but no one moved. Because sometimes, the loudest noise you can make is silence. And for the first time all season, Walt Jensen stood, not because he was told to, but because they finally did. What followed wasn't a game. It was a reminder. The video hit 200,000 views by sunrise. Shot by a sophomore on his cracked iPhone, it opened on a kneeling line of players under the lights and ended on one old man rising to his feet with a slow salute, oxygen mask forgotten, dog tags catching stadium glare like polished justice. But viral moments don't always bring applause. By Monday morning, the superintendent's office was flooded with calls, half praising, half demanding suspensions. Coach Keller, red-faced and cornered, stormed into the locker room before practice like a man trying to put the lid back on a truth too big to box. "You embarrass this school," he spat. "Pacing the rows of steel lockers, you hijacked my team for a stunt." No one spoke. Helmets hung untouched. Sweatpants rustled as the players sat upright, back straighter than usual. Tyrese said nothing, just stared at the floor until Darnell stood. "We didn't kneel for a trend," he said calmly. "We knelt for his grandfather. For what he carried so we could wear this jersey." Keller's jaw clenched. "This is football, not a history class," he snapped. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they landed hollow. Because in the corner sat the team chaplain, who'd brought an old shoebox that morning. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle, and a photo for 1972, a younger Walt Jensen, kneeling in a rice paddy with a bleeding soldier on his back, rifle slung over one shoulder, an American flag stitched into his sleeve. He'd earned his Bronze Star pulling 2 men out of an ambush under live fire. The commendation letter had been signed by a general. The team passed the photo around in silence, each player holding it longer than the last. And for the first time, they weren't just teammates. They were witnesses. That afternoon, Tyrese came home to find his grandfather sitting in the kitchen, flipping through the old leather-bound notebook he never let anyone touch. Walt didn't say much, just pointed to a page and slid it across the table. It was a quote, handwritten, underlined twice. "Legacy is what's left behind when no one's left to explain it." Tyrese read it, then said the thing he hadn't been able to say on the field. "I didn't kneel to prove something. I did it because I didn't know how else to say thank you." Walt gave him a small nod. Then it landed. But the school district wasn't done. A memo leaked the next day. The team would be disciplined for unsanctioned disruption. The media ran with it. Pundits yelled on TV. Some parents fumed in board meetings. One called Walt a relic, said his war didn't belong on a football field. But legacy has a strange way of choosing its moment. That night, Tyrese found a package on the doorstep, a game ball from a retired Marine, sent from across the country. No note, just the words burned into the leather. "For standing when no one asked you to." Then the email started. From vets. From Gold Star kids. From coaches who'd lost players to the war. From strangers who'd watched the video and just wrote, "Tell your grandfather he's not forgotten." Walt didn't reply to any of them. He just printed each one and pinned them to the hallway wall. By Friday, the hallway looked like a shrine. Coach Keller called an emergency meeting. This time, he didn't bark. He just stood in front of the team and said, "I didn't get it. I thought respect came from titles. From who yells the loudest." He looked at Tyrese. "Turns out it comes from who you're willing to kneel beside." And then, in a moment no one expected, he reached into his own gym bag and pulled out Tyrese's jersey, the one he'd pulled off him last week. Folded. Pressed. "Number 12. You're starting tomorrow," he said simply. "Lead us." Tyrese didn't grin. Didn't high-five. He just took the jersey, nodded once, and walked out. That night, Walt added one more thing to the wall, a photograph someone had taken from the stands, the team kneeling, Tyrese at the center, and Walt behind them standing like a statue in fatigues no one could see. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, he scrawled a line from his old commander's letter. "Respect doesn't raise its voice. It stands up when the noise quiets down." And then he closed the shadow box, not to seal it away, but to protect what had already been passed on. The bleachers were packed tighter than they had been all season, and not just because it was homecoming. People came for the rumors, for the team that knelt, for the coach who caved, and for the old man in a military jacket who'd quietly become the symbol of something no one could name but everyone could feel. Reporters circled the track like flies around something living and sacred. The marching band held their breath, unsure whether to play. In the locker room, Tyrese sat on the bench lacing his cleats in silence. The letter from his grandfather's shadow box, now worn at the folds, rested inside his helmet. The players around him didn't shout, didn't joke. They suited up like men about to carry more than pads. Darnell taped his wrists and glanced at him. "They'll be watching you now." Tyrese nodded once. "Then I better make it count." When they ran out of the tunnel, there were no fireworks, no smoke, just the sound of thousands standing up, some with hats over hearts, some with tears in their eyes, and in the second row, Walt Jensen, standing without help for the first time in weeks. He wore his Bronze Star pinned to his chest, not for flash, but for memory. And in the first quarter, when Tyrese took the snap and rolled right, he didn't think of scouts or scholarships. He thought of the sound his grandfather made when he stood up in pain just to salute a flag everyone else had forgotten to see. The pass was perfect. Touchdown. But the moment came in the third quarter, when an opposing linebacker knocked Tyrese flat, the stadium holding its breath as he stayed down for one long second. He rose, slower than usual, but when he did, he didn't point to the crowd. He pointed to row 2, and his grandfather saluted back. That image, boy on the field, man in the stands, would circle the internet by morning, captioned only, "Legacy doesn't kneel alone." But the final moment wasn't on the field. It came the next day at the community center, where the town had gathered for a small, impromptu recognition. Walt didn't want a parade. He didn't speak much. But when they handed him a microphone, he looked out at the sea of students, parents, and players still wearing practice gear and said, "I didn't fight so you clap for me. I fought so you could stand up when it's hard and kneel when it matters." Then he looked at Tyrese. "And that boy over there? He didn't just take a knee for me. He took a stand for every one of us who never got welcomed home, right?" The room went still. Coach Keller stood near the back, eyes red. hands behind his back like a private before a superior. And as Walt left the stage, the applause didn't roar, it rolled, low and full, like thunder from far away. That night, Walt placed one last item in the shadow box, a photo of the team, arms linked, heads bowed. Beneath it, he scribbled a new note. Legacy passed. Watch maintained. He didn't say much after that. Just smiled more. Slept better. And when he passed quietly 2 weeks later, in the same recliner where he used to cheer every Friday night, Tyrese found one last letter taped to the inside of the box. You don't need medals to lead. Just a reason. You've always had mine. At Walt's memorial, the entire Lincoln High football team attended in full uniform. Coach Keller wore his dress blues from back when he served briefly in his 20s, quietly, not proudly, as if trying to honor the man he'd once failed to see. Tyrese stood at the podium, dog tag around his neck, eyes clear. My grandfather never asked to be remembered, he said. But somehow, he always was. The crowd stood in silence, and once more, the entire team took a knee. Not in protest. In thanks. And at the edge of the field where they spread Walt's ashes, a small plaque was placed facing the sunset. It didn't say veteran or hero. It just read. Row 2. He stood first.